Let's journey into the lives of 16 of the most formidable Native American warriors in history, men whose skill, strategy, and unbreakable spirit reshaped entire nations. Their stories are fierce, legendary, and unforgettable. Saddle up. The warriors ride again. Bull Ghost. At number 16, we begin with Bull Ghost, the Northern Arapaho warrior, whose courage carried him through one of the hardest eras in Plains history. Born in what is now Wyoming, Bull Ghost came of age during a time when buffalo herds were shrinking and military outposts were rising across Arapaho homelands. He earned his reputation not through titles, but through the way he stood in battle, the way he read the land, and the way he moved across open country like he was born from the wind itself. Bull Ghost fought in the Powder River region alongside Arapaho and Cheyenne fighters, protecting hunting routes and striking at threats when the survival of his people demanded it. His legend comes mostly from oral history, whispered in stories passed from elders to children near the fires. He was known as the kind of fighter who did not break formation, the one who stepped forward when others hesitated, the one whose footsteps stayed firm, even when outnumbered. Bull Ghost may not appear in every textbook, but within his people he remains a symbol of bravery carried quietly rather than loudly. His battle style, frontline scout, terrain awareness maxed, courage stat unwavering. He did not shape continents, but he protected the heartbeat of his nation. Bull Ghost lands in Tier 3 because even without worldwide fame, he stood as one of the Arapaho's unshaken shields during their most fragile years. Quick pause before we continue. I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Please consider subscribing and feel free to like and share if you're enjoying the story. Now, let's dive back in. At number 15, meet Chief Quanah, a Comanche warrior leader often overshadowed by the later fame of Quanah Parker, yet powerful in his own right. Born during the final years of free-roaming life on the southern plains, Chief Quanah grew up in a world defined by fast horses, open skies, and rivalries fought at full gallop. From youth, he mastered the Comanche arts of speed, raiding, and mounted warfare, which made his people feared from Texas to the Llano Estacado. He became one of the fighters who stood against American expansion as forts, trails, and settlements crept deeper into Comanche territory. Chief Quanah took part in defensive raids, border skirmishes, and resistance actions meant to hold the frontier line as long as humanly possible. His leadership helped delay the collapse of Comanche freedom in the South Plains, giving his people more time before reservation life became unavoidable. Though less documented than Parker, he remains part of Comanche memory as one of the warriors who carried the final flames of resistance. His play style, Plains Rider, cavalry mobility maxed, strike and fade instincts sharpened by generations of tradition. Chief Quanah lands in Tier 3 because he fought bravely in the last years of Comanche independence, even if his story was dimmed by time and written records. At number 14, we arrive at Manuelito, the proud Navajo leader, whose defiance transformed into the backbone of Navajo survival. Born among the Diné in what is now New Mexico, he grew up in a world of canyons, open ranges, and the constant struggle to protect Navajo homelands. As American forces pushed west, Manuelito emerged as one of the final great Navajo war chiefs, mastering stealth raids, ambush operations, and using terrain as a natural shield. When the United States military arrived to force his people into submission, Manuelito fought until the edge of exhaustion. Surrender simply was not in his vocabulary. When the long walk began, the brutal march that sent thousands toward Bosque Redondo, Manuelito endured it and later guided his people home. He returned not as a defeated man, but as a guardian determined to rebuild. In peace, he fought for education, unity, and the future of Navajo youth. His style, guerrilla tactician turned elder protector, endurance maxed, leadership built to survive storms. He did not win every confrontation, but he ensured the Navajo would still have a homeland to defend. Manuelito lands in Tier 3 because he kept his nation alive when an empire tried to erase it. At number 13, meet Pontiac, the Ottawa war chief whose rebellion nearly shook the British Empire to its knees. Born near the Great Lakes in what is now Michigan, Pontiac rose as a strategist capable of uniting tribes that had long fought separately. After the French and Indian War ended in 1763, Pontiac watched British forces tighten their grip on native lands, and he responded with a full-scale, coordinated uprising. He brought together Shawnee, Miami, Potawatomi, and more than a dozen other tribes into a single force determined to halt British expansion. His warriors overran 9 forts and put Fort Detroit under siege for months, using deception, stealth, and synchronized strikes that looked like a real-time strategy masterpiece. Before the siege, a French trader recorded Pontiac saying, "We must be of one heart, one mind, one purpose to drive these dogs out." But alliances faltered, and by 1765, the coalition collapsed. Even so, Pontiac's uprising forced the British to rethink their frontier policies and proved that unity could become a weapon stronger than muskets. His playstyle, coalition commander, morale buff activated, leadership aura always on. Pontiac lands in Tier 3 because his rebellion nearly broke British control of North America, but internal fractures kept him from leveling up into victory. At number 12, meet Quanah Parker, the last great Comanche war chief and one of the most extraordinary leaders of the Southern Plains. Born around 1845 to Comanche chief Peta Nocona and Cynthia Ann Parker, a white woman taken captive as a child, Quanah grew up between two worlds, but loyal to one. He earned his reputation not through inheritance, but through fearless raids, lightning-fast horse attacks, and a natural charisma that pulled warriors into his orbit. During the Red River War, he led his fighters across Texas and the Southern Plains, using mobility, terrain knowledge, and mounted precision to stretch the conflict far longer than the U.S. Army expected. Quanah Parker's leadership kept the Comanche free long after most neighboring nations had already been confined to reservations. Yet what made him legendary was not only how he fought, but how he transformed after the battles ended, when it became impossible to continue war without sacrificing his people. He guided the Comanche into a new era with dignity. He became a rancher, a diplomat, and a negotiator who defended Comanche rights in Washington and at home. His dual mastery of tradition and adaptation kept his nation alive through the hardest transition in their history. His playstyle, warrior-statesman hybrid, mobility maxed, leadership dual class unlocked Quanah Parker lands in Tier 2 because he fought with the heart of a Comanche warrior and led with the vision of a statesman, securing survival in a world that was rapidly closing in. At number 11, we have Manawa, the fierce Red Stick Creek war chief whose name meant great warrior, and he lived up to it in every sense. Born in the late 1700s in present-day Alabama, Manawa rose to prominence through sheer ability, battlefield courage, and loyalty to Creek traditions. When outside influence tore the Creek Nation apart, Manawa led the Red Stick faction in a desperate struggle to protect indigenous customs and sovereignty. His greatest stand came at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814, where he commanded over 1,000 Creek fighters against General Andrew Jackson's forces. Despite being shot multiple times, Manawa refused to leave the battlefield until the final moments. His determination became legend. After the war, he traveled as part of a Creek delegation to Washington, arguing for land rights in an era when Mississippi and Alabama expansion was swallowing native homelands. He spent his later years trying to keep the Creek Nation stable, despite overwhelming pressure from settlers and government removal policies. His playstyle, traditionalist commander, endurance stat maxed, morale aura unbreakable. Manawa lands in Tier 2 because he fought as both warrior and diplomat, defending a fractured nation with everything he had. At number 10, meet Roman Nose, the Northern Cheyenne war chief who became the nightmare of the U.S. cavalry. Born around 1830 in what is now Colorado, Roman Nose rose through his unmatched skill as a plains fighter, speed, precision, and an almost supernatural ability to avoid bullets. To his people, he was believed to carry spiritual protection, a sacred medicine shield that made him unstoppable in battle during the Colorado War and Red Cloud's War. He led devastating assaults on wagon trains, outposts, and military lines, always riding into danger before anyone else dared to follow. Roman Nose lived by a simple warrior code. It is not good to be afraid. Fear makes poor warriors. He embodied that creed every time he rode into enemy fire. At the Battle of Beecher Island, he broke his own ritual requirements, weakening the spiritual protection tied to his shield. Still, he charged straight into the fight, refusing hesitation or retreat. A bullet finally brought him down mid-charge. His playstyle, high-risk berserker, speed and morale damage maxed, but ritual cooldown critical Roman nose lands in Tier 3 because his fearlessness made him a legend, but his refusal to hold back cost him the chance to build something that endured beyond the battlefield. At number 9 is Victorio, the Warm Springs Apache war chief who fought with pure grit, speed, and survival instinct. Born around 1825 in modern-day New Mexico, he mastered ambush tactics and desert warfare early in life, later fighting beside Geronimo as one of the Apache's most brilliant field commanders. When the U.S. government forced his people from their homeland at Ojo Caliente, Victorio rejected prison-like reservation life. With only a few hundred followers, women, children, and warriors, he launched one of the most impressive guerrilla campaigns in North American history. For nearly 2 years, he outmaneuvered thousands of U.S. and Mexican soldiers across deserts, mountains, and canyons, using terrain mastery, hit-and-run tactics, and relentless endurance to stay one step ahead. His belief was simple: better to die fighting than live as captives. And in 1880, surrounded in the Sierra Madre and out of ammunition, he fought until the last bullet was gone. His playstyle, Desert Ghost Commander, stealth maxed, mobility unmatched, survival stats through the roof until the endgame. Victorio lands in Tier 3 because although he never won the war, his asymmetric warfare remains one of history's most brilliant examples of small forces humiliating massive armies. At number 8, we have Chief Joseph, the Nez Perce leader, who found himself forced into a war he never wanted. Born Hinma Tuyalat Kekt in 1840 in the Wallowa Valley of present-day Oregon, Joseph was the son of a peaceful leader who signed treaties the United States later ignored. When the U.S. Army arrived to force his people onto a reservation, Joseph chose resistance not because he desired conflict, but because dignity left him no other choice. In 1877, he led fewer than 300 warriors and over 500 women and children across a 1,400-mile retreat that lasted 3 months. He outmaneuvered General Howard through mountains, forests, and icy rivers, running an almost flawless defensive build, ambush tactics, mobility boosts, and terrain awareness so sharp it nearly broke the chase mechanic. But just 40 miles from the Canadian border and freedom, Joseph was finally surrounded. Exhausted and outgunned, he surrendered with the immortal words, "I will fight no more forever." His playstyle, defensive genius, morale aura, active, endurance maxed, survival turned into strategy. Chief Joseph lands in Tier 2 because his retreat remains a masterpiece of leadership and endurance, even though surrender kept him one step away from ultimate victory. At number 7 sits Sitting Bull, the Hunkpapa Lakota chief who shattered the illusion of U.S. military invincibility. Born around 1831 along the Grand River in modern South Dakota, he grew up hunting buffalo and fighting rival nations long before soldiers ever entered the plains. By the 1870s, he had become both a military leader and spiritual guide, the voice of Lakota resistance against broken promises and forced removal. When asked why he resisted, he answered simply, "What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man ever broken? Not one." In 1876, he received a vision of soldiers falling upside down from the sky, foretelling a great battle. That prophecy became reality at Little Bighorn. Sitting Bull did not lead the charge, but he delivered the ultimate team buff, uniting Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors into one synchronized force. Using speed, terrain, and overwhelming crossfire, they crushed Custer's 7th Cavalry in under an hour. Sitting Bull's fame only grew as the buffalo disappeared and the frontier closed. He toured in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, then returned home to continue guiding his people. He was killed in 1890 during an arrest attempt, defiant to his final breath. His playstyle, spiritual commander, charisma buff maxed, morale control perfect, prophecy cooldown always active. Sitting Bull lands in Tier 2 because his visions united nations and destroyed Custer, but prophecy alone could not build an empire. At number 6 stands Osceola, the Seminole war leader who turned the Florida wetlands into a battlefield no army could conquer. Born in 1804 near Tallahassee, Alabama, to a Creek mother and an English father, he grew up between two worlds but committed his life to defending one. When the U.S. tried to force the Seminole out under the Indian Removal Act, Osceola refused, declaring that no treaty signed under pressure held any truth. After a U.S. officer murdered one of his allies, he vowed vengeance, saying, "I will make the white man red with blood, then blacken him in the sun and rain." Osceola then launched a guerrilla campaign through the Everglades like he was designing a perfect stealth mission. Ambush triggers everywhere, decoys, deception, and night strikes. His small bands vanished back into the swamps after every attack, leaving soldiers confused, exhausted, and humiliated. In 1837, he entered peace talks under a white flag, only to be seized through treachery. Sick with malaria and rage, Osceola died in prison months later, undefeated in spirit. His playstyle, swamp assassin, stealth stat maxed, deception buff constant, terrain mastery permanent. Osceola lands in Tier 2 because his ambush warfare reshaped the Seminole struggle, but betrayal cut his campaign short. At number 5 rises Geronimo, the Bedonkohe Apache war chief who became the face of resistance across the Southwest. Born in 1829 in Nodoyan Canyon in modern New Mexico, he grew up in open country where the sun and wind ruled everything, that freedom shaped his entire life. When Mexican soldiers slaughtered his wife and children, Geronimo swore vengeance and transformed into the most feared guerrilla fighter in North America. He could vanish into the desert like smoke, raiding fortresses, freeing captives, and surviving ambushes that would have destroyed ordinary fighters. By the 1880s, with only 36 warriors, he held off 5,000 U.S. troops, the largest manhunt in American history. Soldiers called him the devil who rides on the wind. When Geronimo finally surrendered in 1886, he did so on his own terms. Not defeated, not broken, but legendary. His playstyle, Desert Phantom, mobility maxed, stealth unparalleled, ultimate hit-and-fade loadout, he battled 4 empires and never logged out. To the U.S., he was an outlaw. To the Apache, he was the very definition of freedom. Geronimo lands in Tier 2 because his endurance and refusal to submit outlasted nations. Even surrender could not dim his legacy. At number 4 stands Crazy Horse, the Oglala Lakota war chief who fought not for fame, titles, or reward, but for the protection of his people and the freedom of the plains. Born around 1840 near the Black Hills of modern South Dakota, he grew up quiet, introspective, and spiritually grounded. He was the embodiment of humility and deadly precision, refusing photographs, medals, or public praise. His guiding belief was simple: I do not want riches. I want peace and love. During the Great Sioux War of 1876, Crazy Horse became the unstoppable blade of Lakota resistance. He led charges personally, riding ahead of his warriors during the battles of the Rosebud and Little Bighorn, where his tactics broke Custer's lines and shattered the 7th Cavalry. Sitting Bull may have provided the prophecy, but Crazy Horse delivered the strike that made it real. Even U.S. scouts said he appeared like a phantom, silent, swift, and gone before they could recover. But victory was short-lived. As more U.S. troops poured west, Crazy Horse refused to surrender his people into uncertainty and hunger. When he was finally brought into custody in 1877, he resisted even then, unarmed, and died from a soldier's bayonet. His playstyle, spirit warrior, speed and precision maxed, glory stats set to 0, soul damage set to maximum. He never signed a treaty, never sat for a portrait, and never bowed to any power. Crazy Horse ranks in Tier 1 because he embodied the purest form of indigenous resistance, fighting without hatred, leading without fear, and dying without surrender. At number 3 stands Tecumseh, the Shawnee war chief, who dreamed bigger than any leader before him. Born in 1768 near present-day Chillicothe, Ohio, he grew up watching his people pushed westward, treaty by treaty, but Tecumseh refused to accept this as fate. "Show respect to all people," he said, "but grovel to none." He envisioned something unprecedented, a united Native Confederacy, one nation made up of many standing together against the loss of their lands. While his brother Tenskwatawa preached spiritual revival, Tecumseh traveled from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, rallying tribes with speeches so powerful that even opponents respected him. He believed land belonged to all native peoples together, that no single tribe had the right to sell it. Sell a country? Why not sell the air, the clouds, and the great sea as well? In 1811, while Tecumseh was gathering allies, U.S. forces destroyed Prophetstown. Instead of weakening him, it strengthened his resolve. In the War of 1812, Tecumseh fought alongside the British and nearly turned the conflict in their favor. He was killed at the Battle of the Thames in 1813, but his name became a rallying cry from Canada to the Gulf. His playstyle, Unifier class, Alliance buffs active, Charisma stat God tier, Leadership passive, always on Tecumseh ranks in Tier 1 because he nearly succeeded in uniting an entire continent, his vision centuries ahead of its time. At number 2, we have Red Cloud, the Oglala Lakota strategist who accomplished the impossible. He defeated the United States in a full-scale war born Mapialuta in 1822 along the Platte River in modern Nebraska. He rose from respected warrior to supreme tactician. Red Cloud understood that victory depended not only on courage, but on patience, unity, and total control of the battlefield. When the U.S. built forts through Lakota hunting grounds along the Bozeman Trail, Red Cloud declared war. From 1866 to 1868, he executed a series of perfectly planned ambushes that military academies still study today. At the Fetterman Fight near Fort Phil Kearny, he used decoys to lure 81 U.S. soldiers into a trap. Not one returned. The precision of his tactics forced the U.S. government to sue for peace and sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the only war the United States has ever formally lost to a native nation. Red Cloud continued fighting politically long after the shooting stopped. "We want to live," he told U.S. officials. "We do not object to the way the white man lives. Why can we not live as we did before?" He died in 1909 at age 87, undefeated in war and unbroken in peace. His playstyle, siege tactician, battlefield control maxed, deception mastery flawless. Red Cloud ranks in Tier 1 because he not only defeated an empire, he forced it to admit defeat. At number 1, we end with Cochise, the Chiricahua Apache war chief who turned mountains into fortresses and outmaneuvered 2 empires for more than a decade. Born around 1805 in the Dragoon Mountains of present-day Arizona, he led the Chokonan band of the Chiricahua, expert fighters who ruled the desert with speed, stealth, and uncanny terrain knowledge. Cochise was respected across the Southwest as a diplomat and warrior whose word meant everything. Then came 1861 and the Bascom Affair, the betrayal that changed history. A young boy named Felix Ward was kidnapped, but not by Cochise's people. Despite this, Lieutenant George Bascom summoned Cochise to a meeting under a white flag. Cochise arrived peacefully with family members, only to be ambushed. He escaped through a tent wall while his brother and nephews were taken hostage. When Bascom hanged them, war ignited like wildfire. For over 10 years, Cochise struck back with surgical precision, ambushing wagon trains, raiding supply lines, and hitting isolated forts across Apache Pass and beyond. He moved his people through the Dragoon and Chiricahua ranges like smoke, untrackable, uncatchable. Thousands of U.S. forces hunted him, but none matched his use of terrain, speed, and misdirection. Cochise turned the desert into a chessboard, and the U.S. Army never learned how to play. By 1872, both sides were exhausted. When General Oliver Howard came to negotiate, Cochise met him as an equal sovereign, not a defeated rebel. "The white man and the Indian shall drink the same water, eat the same bread, and be at peace," he declared. The treaty ended the war on his terms. He retired to the Dragoon Mountains, where legend says his spirit still rides with the winds. His playstyle, Mountain Phantom, terrain mastery 100%, stealth and escape maxed, ultimate defense build. Cochise ranks number 1 because he fought without losing, negotiated without surrendering, protected his homeland, and turned resistance into an art form. They fought empires and rewrote the meaning of defiance. From Bullghost's quiet bravery to Cochise's undefeated mastery of strategy, these 16 warriors were not just fighters. They were tacticians, visionaries, and protectors no empire could erase. They did not fight for conquest. They fought for existence. And their legacy still stands. So tell me, if you had to choose one, which warrior would you play as? Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Your support helps keep these forgotten voices alive. And if you have a moment, please check out the other videos. They explore even more Native American history and the untold truths that shaped America.